There is a family on this show that everyone thinks they understand. You think you know the smart kid, the tired mom, the joke of a father. You think you know who to root for and who to hate. You are wrong on almost every count, and by the end of the next few minutes, you will see exactly why this cast has been quietly lying to your face for 7 seasons. Here's the part nobody tells you. This show is not about one genius. It is about a house full of people fighting for oxygen while one boy uses up all of it without even noticing. Some of them cracked under that weight. Some of them carried the whole family on their back and got called dumb for it. And at least two men wearing a collar and claiming to speak for God did more damage to this family than any outsider ever could. Stay with me, because the character you think is the villain of this story is not even in the top five, and the one person fans forgive the fastest is arguably the most dangerous person in the entire cast. Let's start with the man who shows up in 45 episodes and somehow gets worse every single time he's on screen. Pastor Jeff Difford is not loud. He is not cartoonish. That is exactly what makes him effective. Early seasons, he is just the small town preacher stuck arguing theology with a 9-year-old who has more questions about the universe than the church has answers for. Harmless. Almost funny. You could tolerate that version forever. But something changes the moment a teenage pregnancy becomes public knowledge in this family. Pastor Jeff does not offer grace, he offers pressure. He decides that the people who sit closest to the pulpit need to be held to a higher standard. And he applies that standard to a mother who did not make the decision her son made. Mary is pushed out. Not fired, not banned, just quietly made to understand that her presence is now a liability to the church's image. And here is the detail most viewers skip past. This is not one bad sermon or one awkward conversation. It plays out over an entire season. Mary walks into the building she has trusted her whole adult life and can feel, without a word being said, that she no longer belongs there. Her support system, the one thing she leaned on through every crisis in this show, turns cold on her because a pastor decided appearances mattered more than compassion. That alone would make him one of the most disliked figures in the whole series. But he is not the worst person wearing a robe in this town. And the one who beats him is more dangerous specifically because he never looks like a threat. Pastor Rob walks in as the cool, modern, approachable youth pastor. Kids like him. Parents like him. And Mary likes him a little too much. That is the entire problem in one sentence. While George Sr. is at home juggling bills, coaching a football team that keeps losing, trying to parent a son whose brain operates on a different frequency than his own, and trying not to lose sight of two other kids who desperately need attention, there is a man at church getting a little too close to his wife. Viewers noticed it immediately. The tension is not subtle once you know what to look for. Here is the twist that makes him worse than Pastor Jeff. He plays the good guy the entire time. He is the one who publicly pushes back when Jeff punishes Mary for Georgie's situation. He looks like her defender. Meanwhile, he is quietly becoming the exact kind of emotional risk that could destroy her marriage from the inside. Fake concern layered on top of a real threat. That combination is why so many viewers rank him higher on their hated list than a man who actively humiliated Mary in public. Open cruelty is easy to identify and reject. A slow, friendly erosion of a marriage is much harder to see coming and much harder to forgive once you do. Now here is where the story flips, because while the church was busy judging this family from the outside, there was a man standing quietly at the center of it, holding everything together and getting almost no credit at all. George Cooper Sr. If you only know this family from Big Bang Theory, you were handed a lie for over a decade. Adult Sheldon describes his father as a crude, not particularly bright, beer-drinking football coach who barely understood his own son. Young Sheldon spends 7 seasons dismantling that description piece by piece. This is a man who turned down a better-paying coaching job in another city because his family did not want to uproot their lives. This is a man who noticed his daughter was struggling with puberty and stepped in to bond with her specifically because his wife was too consumed with Sheldon to notice Missy needed a parent too. This is a man who watched another coach take credit for wins he earned and never once took that frustration out on his kids. And then there is the tape. In Big Bang Theory, adult Sheldon finds an old recording of his father giving a locker room speech about how losing does not make you a loser, and that failure teaches you as much about yourself as success does. That single recording helps Sheldon through a moment nothing else could reach. The show took Sheldon's dismissive childhood memory of his father and quietly proved it wrong using his father's own words. Then the writers went even further. Big Bang Theory implied George cheated on Mary, based on something young Sheldon witnessed and misunderstood. Young Sheldon later reveals what actually happened. The woman Sheldon saw was Mary herself. It was never an affair. It was a private moment between two married people that a child misread. That retcon matters because it means the version of George that audiences grew to respect over 7 seasons was never actually undone by the one accusation that could have ruined him completely. But George is not the only member of this family who quietly absorbed damage and kept going. Because the person who held this family together after George died is someone the show spent years training you to underestimate. Georgie Cooper Jr. He starts this series as the humiliated older brother stuck in classes with his 9-year-old sibling. Nobody in the family really acknowledges how degrading that is for a teenager. But Georgie does not fold. He finds he has a genuine talent for sales. He works odd jobs, gets fired, finds another hustle, and keeps moving. He lies about his age to Mandy, which is a real and serious mistake, but when the truth surfaces, he does not run from it. He steps into fatherhood. He tries to clean up how he speaks in front of his daughter, because even small criticism from Mandy's mother gets under his skin enough to change his behavior. He marries Mandy. He builds something out of very little. Then George Sr. dies, and everything the show quietly built in Georgie for years suddenly clicks into place, because Big Bang Theory already told us what happens next. Adult Georgie later explains to Sheldon that after their father died, their mother was devastated and barely functioning. Missy was still a teenager working through her own grief, and someone had to actually run the household. That someone was Georgie. While Sheldon left for Caltech to chase Nobel Prizes, Georgie stayed behind and eventually built the most successful tire business in the state. He is a fan favorite, not because he is clever, but because he showed up exactly when it mattered most, with no recognition and no applause. So now you have two men in this family who sacrificed enormously and received almost no credit for it, which makes the next group of characters sting even harder, because these are the people who actively made an already struggling family's life worse. Audrey Mallister, Mandy's mother, does not even appear until the 6th season, which means she has less screen time than almost anyone on this list and still manages to become one of the most disliked characters in the entire show. From the very first uncomfortable dinner, it is obvious she views Georgie as beneath her daughter. She critiques his grammar, his upbringing, his age, his family, all in the same breath. The baby shower turns into an outright competition between her and Mary over whose version of grandmother wins. Wedding planning later becomes another battlefield, with a newborn caught in the crossfire. Some viewers argue her overprotectiveness is realistic given the circumstances, and that is a fair point. But the show never frames her as reasonable. It frames her as an obstacle, and most of the audience agreed with that framing. But the most divisive character in this entire show is not Audrey, and it is not either pastor. It is the woman standing at the center of this family the whole time, Mary Cooper. Here's what makes her so hard to simply hate. Almost everything she does traces back to one real trauma. Missy's difficult birth nearly cost her a child, and religion became the structure that held Mary together afterward. Her faith is not a personality trait. It is a coping mechanism built directly from fear. That is why she hovers over Sheldon. That is why she tries to control his future and even hides a college acceptance letter from her own husband. She is not doing any of this out of cruelty. She is terrified of losing another child in whatever form that loss might take. But here is the part that turns viewers against her anyway. Her fear does not stay contained to Sheldon. It swallows the rest of the family whole. Missy openly says she feels invisible in her own house. A season 2 twin study in the show actually proves Missy is just as emotionally perceptive as Sheldon is analytically brilliant. They are equals operating in completely different categories of intelligence. Mary never sees it that way. She is too locked onto the child she has decided needs saving. And then there is the line adult Sheldon repeats on Big Bang Theory, where Mary once described her other two children as not particularly bright. After watching 7 seasons of Young Sheldon, after watching Georgie build a business empire from nothing, and watching Missy function as the family's emotional backbone, that line stops being a throwaway joke and starts feeling genuinely cruel. That is the entire Mary problem in one sentence. She is not a villain. She is a fully realized, flawed parent whose love gets distributed so unevenly that it quietly damages the very children she thinks she is protecting. She is not alone in that polarizing company either. Dale Ballard refuses to let Missy try out for baseball simply because she is a girl, and later fires Georgie harshly after a robbery even though the stolen money gets repaid in full. Brenda Sparks, the loud neighbor turned flirtation interest for George Sr., becomes the center of a tense confrontation with Mary, and whether that confrontation feels justified depends entirely on which side of the marriage you are standing on. Even Mandy divides opinion. She has every right to feel betrayed by Georgie's lie about his age, though the situation gets messier once you remember she lied about her own age too. Some viewers feel she takes Georgie's effort for granted even after everything he sacrifices to become a real partner and father. And then there is Sheldon himself, the person this entire show is named after. Something strange happens to him as the seasons progress. The rest of the cast keeps growing more complicated and more human, while Sheldon largely stays in place. Early on, he is a genuinely vulnerable kid trying to survive in a world that does not know what to do with him. By the 5th and 6th seasons, his family is dealing with teenage pregnancy, job loss, public humiliation at church, and real marital strain, while Sheldon is in the next room worried about whether his computer database is functioning correctly. His problems are not small in isolation. They just start to feel small because the writers built such a strong ensemble around him that his intellectual struggles simply cannot compete with the emotional weight everyone else is carrying. That imbalance is exactly what makes the beloved side of this cast hit as hard as it does, because these are the people who lived through all of that neglect and judgment and still chose to show up for someone else. Missy Cooper got the shortest end of every stick in this family. She is sharp, funny, emotionally intelligent, and almost nobody around her treats any of that like it matters. One especially telling episode has Sheldon's science project failing while the entire family drops everything to help him. And in the very same stretch of episodes, Missy is dealing with real teenage pain that nobody even notices. She eventually rebels by taking off in her father's truck, not out of recklessness, but because rebellion is the only volume loud enough to get this family's attention. Later in the show's final season, while Mary and Sheldon are away, Missy is the one who quietly holds the household together. And one of her most quoted lines, delivered to Sheldon before his college graduation, is the simple idea that being scared does not mean you stop moving forward. You just do it scared anyway. A 14-year-old understood more about resilience in that moment than Sheldon's genius ever gave him credit for. Meemaw is loved for an entirely different reason. She supports Sheldon's talent without ever suffocating him the way Mary does. She drives him to college, works through science projects with him, and later becomes his very unofficial legal client. But she also lives a genuinely messy adult life outside her role as grandmother. She dates, breaks up, runs an illegal card game out of her home, gets arrested for it, and faces real consequences. Fans love her because she never performs goodness. She simply exists as a complicated, flawed, deeply loyal woman, who also happens to be an excellent grandmother. Dr. Sturgis rounds out the top tier of beloved characters. Brilliant, gentle, genuinely invested in Sheldon as a mentee rather than a curiosity, and quietly one of the most vulnerable adults in the entire show. After a breakdown, he recovers in a mental health facility, and he later ends a relationship because he is simply honest about his own limitations instead of pretending to be fine. In a show full of people desperately performing strength they do not feel, Sturgis is the one person who openly admits he cannot always hold it together, and that honesty is exactly why so many viewers gravitate toward him. Then there are the wild cards who refuse to fit neatly on either list. Paige Swanson only appears in a handful of episodes, but she functions as Sheldon's dark mirror, a genius on his level with far worse family support and far more visible damage to show for it. Her parents divorce, her grades collapse, and she starts pulling other people into her chaos. Some viewers love her for exposing what happens to a gifted kid without stability. Others resent her for dragging Missy and Sheldon into the fallout. Billy Sparks flips expectations in the opposite direction, going from Sheldon's supposed childhood bully in Big Bang Theory to one of the sweetest, most harmless characters in the entire Young Sheldon cast. And Professor Linkletter starts out barely tolerating Sheldon's ego, only to eventually admit, alongside Sturgis, that Sheldon has genuinely outgrown their small college and needs to move on. That slow shift from irritation to quiet respect is easy to miss, but attentive fans caught every beat of it. So here is the pattern sitting underneath every single character we just walked through. Every character audiences genuinely love pays close attention to someone else's pain. George noticed Missy when Mary could not. Georgie carried the family when Sheldon physically could not be there. Missy saw through everyone's walls while nobody bothered looking through hers. Meemaw treated Sheldon like an actual person instead of a project to manage. Sturgis was simply honest about his own breaking point, and every character audience's turn on did the exact opposite. Pastor Jeff judged instead of helping. Pastor Rob performed concern while quietly creating a real threat. Audrey looked down instead of reaching across. Mary poured everything into one child and left two others starving for the same attention. The real question this entire show is asking, underneath all the comedy, has nothing to do with intelligence or even who is technically right in any given argument. It comes down to one thing. When someone in this family was hurting, did that person show up for them or did they make it worse? That question is why a show named after the smartest person in the room ends up proving, 7 seasons later, that being smart was never the most important trait any of these characters could have had. If this breakdown changed how you see this family, you already know there is one character we barely scratched the surface on, and his story alone might be the most tragic redemption arc in the entire show. That is next.